She stood in the rain outside a mansion that once felt like home, clutching her twins as thunder drowned her cries. They took her husband, her dignity, and the roof above her head. But what they never knew was that the truth Evan left behind would make her unstoppable.
Hello, if you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and tap the notification bell. Type in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as touching as this one, or maybe even crazier. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's begin.
She stood in the rain outside the mansion that once felt like home, clutching her twins as thunder drowned her cries. They took her husband, her dignity, and the roof above her head. But what they never knew was that the truth Evan left behind would make her unstoppable. The storm that night was not just in the sky above Hendersonville, North Carolina. It was inside Colleen Ward. The mountain wind howled through the trees, carrying the echo of a woman's life unraveling. Behind those brick walls, chandeliers still glowed warm for the people who had just buried her husband and already buried her place in their world. Evan Ward had been the one good branch on a family tree heavy with pride, where his parents, Harold and Margot, measured worth in inheritance and appearance. Evan had believed in effort, in kindness. He met Colleen when she was waitressing at a coffee shop off Main Street. He tipped too much and smiled too easily, and somehow the banker's son and the waitress built a quiet miracle of their own. Their home sat just outside town, tucked beneath oaks that dripped amber leaves every fall. Neighbors remember the laughter, the way Colleen's voice rose above the twins' giggles each evening, the smell of Evan's barbecue wafting down the hill. They were not wealthy, but they were rich where it mattered. Until the phone call came on a gray Tuesday morning. A crash on the highway near Asheville, a truck that never slowed. At the funeral, Colleen barely recognized herself. Black dress borrowed from a neighbor, hands that would not stop trembling. The Ward mansion smelled of roses and money. Harold shook her hand as though she were a guest at her own husband's burial. Margot's smile never reached her eyes. In the corner of the study, a lawyer waited. Gray suit, polite distance. He pressed a sealed envelope into Colleen's palm. "Evan left this for you," he whispered. "Said to open it when you're ready." She slid it into her coat pocket, too numb to ask questions. The service ended under heavy clouds. As mourners drifted away, Colleen stood beside the coffin long after everyone else had gone, whispering promises through her tears. She told him she'd raise their twins the way they'd planned, that she'd keep them safe no matter what came next. When she turned toward the house, Harold's voice stopped her. "We'll discuss arrangements soon." No comfort, no warmth, just business. That night, after the twins fell asleep, Colleen walked the silent halls of the mansion for the last time. The portraits on the walls, Wards in tailored suits and perfect posture, seemed to watch her like jurors. She touched the banister Evan had carved their initials into when they first moved in, C+E, still visible beneath the varnish. Her heart ached at how love leaves marks even where it's unwelcome. Outside, thunder rolled closer. She found Margot in the sitting room sipping tea. "I'll be leaving tomorrow," Colleen said quietly. Margot didn't look up. "That's for the best." No argument, no invitation to stay. Just a door closing behind a widow who still smelled of funeral flowers. The next morning, the twins helped her fold their clothes into one battered suitcase. They didn't understand why they couldn't sleep in their own beds anymore. Colleen told them sometimes grown-ups forget what kindness looks like, but she'd remember for all of them. As she stepped onto the porch, the sky opened. Rain came hard and cold, drenching her hair and her grief. She lifted her face to it, let it wash the salt from her cheeks, and whispered, "We'll be okay." Across the street, a neighbor watched from behind a curtain, pity etched in her eyes. But pity was the one thing Colleen couldn't bear. She tightened her grip on the twins' hands, started the car, and drove toward town with everything she owned rattling in the trunk. Some stories begin with dreams. Hers began with survival. In Hendersonville's downtown, neon signs flickered above empty diners and rain-slicked pavement. Colleen parked near a thrift store that smelled faintly of dust and lavender. An old woman sweeping the stoop looked up and offered a gentle nod, the first human kindness Colleen had felt since Evan's death. She rented a small apartment above that shop that afternoon, 2 rooms, creaky floors, and a window that faced the mountains. To her, it felt like a beginning. She laid the twins' blankets on the floor and told them stories until they slept. Then, alone at the tiny kitchen table, she opened her notebook and wrote the first line of her new life. "Dear Evan, I hope heaven is quieter than Hendersonville tonight." The ink bled slightly on the cheap paper, but she didn't stop writing until dawn. Loss doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock. It simply enters and leaves you to decide whether to rebuild or remain broken. And somewhere beneath the ache and exhaustion, Colleen decided she would rebuild. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the letter still sealed inside her coat pocket would one day turn the entire Ward legacy upside down.
Sometimes life doesn't give warnings, it gives summons. For Colleen Ward, that summons came 3 weeks after the funeral. A cream-colored envelope arrived with her name written in bold black ink. The letterhead read, "Ward and Ellis, Attorneys at Law, Charlotte, North Carolina." It was formal, distant, and cold. Inside, a single line. "Please attend the reading of the late Evan Ward's estate. Attendance required." Colleen stared at the words for a long moment, the twins playing quietly beside her. The world outside her window was calm, sun cutting through early spring mist, but her stomach churned. She hadn't seen or spoken to Harold or Margot since the day she left their home. The thought of walking back into that world, into their polished, loveless mansion, made her palms sweat. Still, she went, because she believed that somewhere in those files, Evan had left something for their children. Not money, just acknowledgement. Maybe a letter. Maybe his wedding ring. Something to hold on to. She drove the 2 hours to Charlotte in her old sedan. The rain had washed the mountains clean overnight, leaving the air sharp and new. But inside the car, the air was tight. The twins napped in the back seat, unaware of how much her mother's heart was trembling. When she arrived at the Ward estate, the iron gates opened without a word. A man in a suit, Harold's assistant, escorted her through the foyer that gleamed like a showroom. Every corner smelled of lilies again, as if grief could be masked with perfume. Inside the study sat Harold Ward, stiff-backed behind the mahogany desk, and Margot, her pearl necklace glinting like armor. Beside them, the family lawyer, Mr. Ellis, adjusted his spectacles and gestured toward a chair across from them. Colleen sat, her voice barely a whisper. "Let's begin." Ellis cleared his throat. According to Mr. Ward's instructions, all assets, including the primary residence, investments, and company shares, will remain under the Ward Family Trust, as overseen by Mr. Harold Ward. Colleen frowned. And for Evan's wife and children? Ellis hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Harold, who nodded for him to continue. "There are no additional provisions noted." The room seemed to shrink. For a moment, Colleen couldn't breathe. Her voice cracked. "That can't be right. Evan would never—" Harold leaned forward, his voice cold and deliberate. "My son was generous but naive. You forget, Colleen. He didn't own much of what he used. The house, the cars, even the shares. They belong to the Ward name, not your marriage." Margot's lips curved into something like pity. "You have your memories. Let that be enough." Colleen's hands clenched in her lap. The air vibrated with something sharp and invisible. Humiliation, grief, disbelief. "I just want what's fair for Aiden and Elise," she whispered. Harold's expression hardened. "Fair," he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. Then he stood, walked to the door, and held it open. You have 1 hour to collect your things from the Charlotte apartment. The family trust will no longer cover your expenses after today." Colleen stared at him. "You're throwing us out?" Margot sighed, feigning grace. "You'll manage, dear. You always do." Outside, thunder rumbled again, though the sky was still clear. The twins' small hands clung to hers as they stood beside their car, the mansion looming behind them. Every window reflected her, small, wet-eyed, and uninvited. She opened the trunk, fit the single suitcase beside a cardboard box of keepsakes, Evan's framed photo, the twins' drawings, and the notebook she wrote in every night. The first raindrop hit her cheek, like a punctuation mark, then another. Within seconds, it poured. As she buckled the twins in, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the first surge of something she hadn't felt in weeks: anger. Not the wild kind, but the quiet, focused sort that simmers beneath grief. There are moments in life when pain doesn't break you. It rebuilds you into something the world no longer expects you to be. She took one last look at the mansion. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Not as a threat, but as a prophecy. That night, back in Hendersonville, she laid the twins to sleep in their makeshift beds. She stood at the window, watching the streetlights flicker, and pulled Evan's sealed envelope from her coat pocket. Her thumb traced his handwriting. She almost opened it, but something stopped her. Maybe fear. Maybe timing. Maybe the knowledge that once she opened it, she could never return to not knowing. She tucked it into the drawer of her nightstand and whispered to the darkness, "Not yet, Evan. I need to be ready first." Some secrets wait until pain becomes strength. Some truths won't reveal themselves until the heart is strong enough to face them. And that was the night Colleen Ward stopped being the woman everyone pitied. That was the night she started becoming the woman her in-laws would one day fear.
When you lose everything, people expect you to fall apart. Colleen Ward didn't. She simply went quiet. The following week, Hendersonville woke early, as always, the smell of coffee drifting from the diner on Main Street, the bell above the door jingling each time a local came in for breakfast. Colleen was behind that counter now, hair pinned up, apron tied too tight, pretending the ache in her chest was just another muscle learning how to work again. Every morning, she brewed coffee for men who talked about weather and football while her mind replayed the lawyer's words. No additional provisions noted. Each syllable still scraped at her ribs. Her co-workers didn't know who she was. To them, she was just the new girl upstairs. But the owner, Mrs. Lawson, had seen widows before. She'd lost her own husband to the mines decades earlier, and she recognized the posture of someone carrying invisible weight. She never asked questions. She just left extra pie slices on Colleen's tray when she clocked out. After her shifts, Colleen picked up the twins from the community center where a kind volunteer named Ruthie watched them after school. They'd chatter about crayons, songs, and field trips. Their innocence was her anchor and her torment. It reminded her that she couldn't afford to collapse. But at night, when the twins were asleep, the silence pressed in. The rain tapping the window became the rhythm of memory. Evan's laugh, his hand on her back, the unfinished sentences that would never find endings. She'd write to him in her notebook. "They took your name, but they can't take what it meant to me. I'm still yours, even in the ruin." Then she'd close the book, blow out the candle, and sit in the dark until morning blurred the stars away. Hendersonville's spring turned to early summer. The diner filled with tourists, and Colleen learned to smile again, if it only with her mouth. There were moments, tiny, fragile ones, when she almost forgot the sound of Margot Ward's voice. But forgetting is never permanent. One afternoon, while cleaning the counter, she saw a man in a tailored suit step through the diner's door. He didn't belong there. not with those polished shoes or that city gait. He asked for black coffee and sat by the window, briefcase at his feet. When his eyes met hers, something in her chest lurched. He introduced himself quietly. "Grant Lowe. I used to work with your husband's family. May I have a word when you're off the clock?" Colleen froze. Her first instinct was to refuse, to protect what little peace she'd managed to build. But there was something in his tone, a hesitation that sounded more like guilt than business. She nodded once. "After my shift." For the next hour, she worked mechanically, pretending not to notice him watching the rain outside, tapping his finger against his cup. When the clock hit 3, she untied her apron and sat across from him in the empty booth. "Whatever the Wards sent you to say, I've heard enough of their words." He shook his head. "They didn't send me." Then he lowered his voice. "But they've hidden something. Something I think you need to see. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive as light. Sometimes it arrives disguised as another storm." Grant slid a folded paper across the table. It wasn't an official letter, just a poppy copy of an old file, edges smudged with ink. Across the top, in Evan Ward's handwriting, were the words, "Family Trust Revision, Confidential." Colleen's breath caught. She recognized the scrawl instantly. Grant continued, "I found this while closing old estate accounts. There's a trust your husband created privately, outside his father's control. It lists you and your children as beneficiaries." Her hands trembled. "Then why did the lawyer say there was nothing?" He hesitated. "Because Harold Ward buried it. If I'm right, he paid to keep these documents sealed." Colleen's jaw tightened. The room spun slightly, not from fear, but from the shock of hope colliding with outrage. "If you're lying, you're no better than they are." "I know. That's why I'm not." That night, Colleen didn't write in her notebook. She couldn't. Her mind churned with fragments of the day, the file, Grant's steady voice, Evan's handwriting on that header. She pulled the sealed envelope from the drawer again. The edges were soft now, worn from her thumb tracing them night after night. She almost opened it. Almost. But something in her said, "Not yet." Grief teaches patience. Justice demands it. Instead, she tucked the envelope beneath her pillow and whispered a different kind of promise this time. "They thought I was gone, Evan, but I'm still here, and I'm not done." Outside, the mountains stood silent and dark against the Carolina moon. The rain had finally stopped, but thunder rumbled somewhere far off, too distant to threaten, close enough to warn.
In Hendersonville, the days were beginning to lengthen. Spring flowers had given way to full summer bloom, and the mountains stood quiet and watchful, like witnesses to something the world had not yet seen. Colleen Ward woke each morning to the sound of her twins laughing in the next room, their voices rising above the hum of cicadas. She smiled sometimes, but it never reached her eyes. The diner, the tiny apartment, the notebook beside her bed, they had all become her rhythm. Predictable. Safe. Until the morning, Grant Lowe knocked on her door. It was a Saturday. The twins were building a fort out of blankets, and Colleen was making pancakes from the last of the flour. The knock startled her. Few people knew where she lived. She hesitated before opening it, wiping her hands on her apron. Grant stood there, not in a suit this time, but in jeans and a windbreaker, a folder tucked under his arm. His expression was serious, but not unkind. "I'm sorry to come unannounced, but I've found something. Something I think you need to see right away." Colleen didn't move aside. "You should have called." "I tried. Your number didn't go through." She folded her arms, still blocking the doorway. "If this is about the Wards, it is, but not the way you think." The twins peeked out from behind her, whispering. Grant gave a faint smile. "May I come in?" She hesitated again. Every instinct screamed to keep her walls up. But curiosity, and something deeper, overrode it. She stepped aside. He entered, glancing around the small space. A humble home, but alive. Children's drawings taped to the wall, books stacked near the window, a faint smell of cinnamon and soap. It was the opposite of the sterile mansion he had stood in weeks ago. He placed the folder on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were copies of financial documents, signatures, and one grainy photograph. I tracked where Harold Ward redirected several of Evan's private accounts. Funds were moved to shell corporations right after Evan's accident. These transfers were supposed to be confidential. They weren't part of the official estate file. Colleen stared down at the papers. Evan's name appeared again and again, written in his neat, familiar hand. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because it proves that your husband was trying to protect something, or someone, before he died." Her eyes flicked to him. "Protect who?" He hesitated. "You and the children. The accounts were set up in your names, but he hadn't finalized the beneficiary transfer. That's why Harold was able to hide them." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the tick of the clock above the stove. Colleen swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. "You're saying Evan knew something was going to happen?" "I don't know," Grant said, "but it looks like he was preparing for the possibility." The twins tugged at her sleeve, sensing tension without understanding it. She turned to them, forcing a smile. "Go finish your fort, okay?" They nodded and ran off, laughter echoing down the hall. When she turned back, her eyes were glistening. "What do you want from me, Mr. Lowe?" "Nothing," he said simply. "But if you let me, I'll help you find out what really happened to his estate." Fate has a way of binding strangers with invisible thread, threads spun from guilt, truth, or unfinished love. From that day forward, Grant kept coming back. He brought folders, old ledgers, and records from the courthouse. Sometimes he stayed late while the twins colored at the table, their crayons scratching over paper as the adults whispered about numbers and dates. Their partnership was uneasy at first. Colleen didn't trust easily, and Grant seemed haunted by his own regrets. But every evening they spent combing through files, something shifted. He'd ask about Evan, what kind of man he had been, how they'd met. She'd tell him about summer evenings on the porch, about how Evan used to hum when he was nervous. In turn, Grant revealed fragments of his own past, his failed marriage, the child he rarely saw, the choices that had made him leave the Ward firm. Slowly, the tension between them began to ease. One night, after hours of poring over documents, Grant leaned back and rubbed his temples. "There's a pattern in these transfers," he said. "Every one of them routes through the same holding company, registered under a false name. Someone had to authorize it." Colleen frowned. "You think Harold forged Evan's signature?" "Maybe, but I need proof." She leaned forward. "Then let's find it." Grant looked at her, really looked at her, the tired lines under her eyes, the steady determination that replaced grief. "You're stronger than I expected," he said quietly. Colleen's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "You shouldn't underestimate people who've been broken. We know how to rebuild." It was close to midnight when Grant finally packed his things. The twins had fallen asleep on the couch, tangled in blankets. The lamplight made the whole room glow soft gold. At the door he paused. "I'll be in touch tomorrow," he said. "We're close, Colleen. I can feel it." She nodded. "Thank you, Grant, for believing me." He hesitated a moment longer before stepping into the night. When the door closed, Colleen leaned against it, her breath unsteady. She didn't want to feel what she was feeling. The warmth of gratitude, the spark of something like trust. It felt like betrayal to the memory of Evan. And yet, deep inside, she knew this was no betrayal. It was survival, the kind Evan would have wanted for her. Sometimes the people sent to save you arrive long after you've stopped waiting. And sometimes they don't just save you, they remind you what you're still capable of becoming. Colleen walked to the window. Outside, Hendersonville lay still beneath the moonlight. She watched Grant's taillights disappear down Main Street, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel entirely alone. She turned back to the table, to the pile of documents, and one small envelope still resting at the edge. She brushed her fingers over Evan's handwriting. Not yet, but soon.
There are nights that do not pass easily. Nights when the world holds its breath because someone's truth is about to surface. For Colleen Ward, that night arrived with a storm. The rain came down heavy over Hendersonville, drumming against the diner windows and flooding the gutters along Main Street. Inside her apartment, above the shop, the power flickered, throwing shadows across the walls. The twins slept soundly, but Colleen sat awake at the table, surrounded by folders. Each paper, each name, each signature felt like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle that refused to fit. When the knock came, she didn't flinch this time. She already knew who it was. Grant Lowe stood at the door, rain running down his jacket. "Sorry it's late," he said, "but I think I've found what we've been missing." She let him in, handed him a towel, and poured 2 mugs of coffee. The air between them hummed with tension. Not romantic yet, but something intimate born of shared secrets. Grant spread the papers out on the table. "I went through the old ledgers again. There's one entry that doesn't add up. A company registered in your husband's name 5 months before his death." Colleen frowned. Evan didn't own a company. He was a project manager, not a businessman. "That's what I thought. But look here." He pointed at a form. Blue Horizon Holdings. Evan Ward listed as founder. Mailing address, your old house. She stared at the document, heart pounding. Why would he do that? Grant hesitated before answering. "Because he knew the family would never let you have control over your future. I think he set up this company to hold assets separately from the estate. Money, maybe property." Her voice broke. "You mean he was trying to protect us?" "Yes," Grant said softly. He knew what kind of people he was dealing with. Colleen pushed the papers aside and stood up, trembling. "They made me feel like I was nothing, like I was just his mistake." Grant rose, his tone gentle. "You were never that." For a moment, the storm filled the silence. Thunder rolled through the valley, and the power blinked out, except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Colleen took a shaky breath. "You ever wonder," she whispered, "why people like Harold Ward get to sleep at night?" Grant's answer was quiet, steady. "Because people like you haven't taken their power back yet." Later that night, Grant found a small metal box inside one of the folders. He hadn't noticed before. It was scratched and dented, sealed with a tiny lock. Colleen leaned forward. "What is it?" "Something your husband hid," he said. "He must have sent it to the office before he died. It was buried in archive storage." Her fingers brushed against the box's surface. "Do you have the key?" He shook his head. "No, but look. There's an engraving on the bottom." Under the faint light, they could make out 2 words carved into the metal. "For her." Colleen's throat tightened. Evan's handwriting, she knew it instantly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He meant me." He nodded. "You should open it." The next morning, Colleen took the box to the locksmith at the edge of Hendersonville. The old man behind the counter, Mr. Draper, raised an eyebrow at the rusted latch. "Looks delicate," he muttered, turning it over. "Give me a few minutes." Colleen waited by the window as Grant paced behind her. The minutes dragged. When Mr. Draper finally opened the box, he stepped back, eyes wide. Inside was a sealed envelope and a small flash drive. The envelope bore Evan's name, written in ink that had faded to a soft brown. Hands trembling, Colleen opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "If you're reading this, it means the worst has happened. I've tried to shield you from my family's greed, but if Harold has succeeded in taking control, this drive contains everything he never wanted the world to see. It's yours now, Colleen. Protect the twins, and trust no one from the Ward estate." Her vision blurred as tears spilled down her cheeks. Grant reached across the counter, steadying her hand. "It's okay, you don't have to read more right now." But she did. She couldn't stop. "I've arranged something for you. If you contact my friend at the old Hendersonville bank, Thomas Keene, he'll know what to do. I've transferred everything under Blue Horizon Holdings to your name. They'll come for it, but don't be afraid. They can't take what's already yours." The paper slipped from her hands. She pressed her palm to her chest, gasping. Grant picked up the flash drive. "We need to see what's on this." She nodded weakly. "Not here. Somewhere safe." They drove out to the overlook beyond the town, the one Evan used to take her to when life felt too heavy. Hendersonville glittered below, small and fragile under the night sky. Grant plugged the drive into his laptop. Files filled the screen, bank statements, emails, even scanned documents signed by Harold Ward himself. Colleen covered her mouth. He was stealing from his own son. Grant's voice was grim. And laundering it through fake charities. "If this ever went public, they'd destroy me before it did," she finished. He looked at her, eyes steady. "Not if we're smart." Colleen turned toward the view, wind sweeping her hair across her face. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought I was helpless. But Evan, he left me a way out." Grant said quietly, "He didn't just leave you that, he left you a choice." That night as they drove back, Colleen felt something shift inside her. Grief was no longer just pain, it was becoming purpose. She tucked the flash drive into her pocket, the metal box back under her arm. "They wanted me gone," she said. "Now they'll see what it means when I come back." Grant smiled faintly. "That's the Colleen Ward I was hoping to meet." Sometimes the past doesn't break you. Sometimes it's the map that leads you back to yourself. Back home, Colleen set the metal box on her dresser beside the old envelope Evan had left months before. For the first time, she felt ready to open it soon, not in grief, but in strength. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, tired but fierce. "You did this for us, Evan," she whispered. "Now I'll finish what you started." Thunder rolled again outside, but this time she didn't flinch.
Morning broke gently over Hendersonville. Mist clung to the hills, the sky painted in silver and rose. Inside the small apartment above the diner, Colleen Ward stood by the window, her hand resting on the cool glass, watching the light crawl over the town that had given her both refuge and pain. The twins were still asleep, curled beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of rain. She turned toward the kitchen, where the small metal box sat on the counter, silent, patient, almost breathing. Next to it, the flash drive gleamed faintly in the dawn light. She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, exhaustion mixing with something new, not dread, not grief, but a steady hum of purpose. She had spent too long letting fear shape her days. That was over. The knock on the door was soft this time. Grant Lowe didn't need to announce himself anymore. She could sense when he was near. She opened the door before he could knock again. "Morning," he said, smiling faintly. "I brought breakfast." He held up a brown paper bag that smelled like butter and cinnamon. "You shouldn't have," she said, though the corner of her mouth betrayed a small, honest smile. "After everything last night, we both needed something that doesn't come from a file or a courtroom." They sat across from each other, steam rising from the mugs. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't empty. The kind that feels like rest after a long storm. Grant glanced toward the box. "You haven't opened it yet." She shook her head. "Not yet. I will, but I wanted to remember what it felt like to breathe first." He nodded. "Then let's start with that." As they ate, they talked. Not about the Wards, not about money or betrayal, but about small things. About the town fair that would set up next week in the square. About the best pie in Hendersonville. About how the twins were obsessed with stars lately and wanted a telescope. Grant listened with quiet admiration. He wasn't used to this kind of simplicity. His life had been filled with boardrooms, contracts, and the kind of people who measured worth in dollar signs. But with Colleen, the world slowed down. It felt real. At one point, Aiden wandered into the room, rubbing his eyes. "Is it morning already?" he mumbled. "Almost," Colleen said, smiling. "Go brush your teeth. We've got pancakes." The boy yawned, looked at Grant suspiciously, then whispered loudly to his mother,
Is he the computer man? Grant chuckled. I guess I am. Do you fix robots too? Only the really nice ones, he said. The boy grinned before running off, and for a brief moment laughter filled the room. Fragile, human, healing. Later, when the twins went to the park with Ruthie, Colleen and Grant stayed behind to go through the files again. But the work was different now. They sat close, their shoulders nearly touching, the silence between them no longer heavy, but comforting. Grant reached across her to move a stack of papers, and his hand brushed hers. She froze, the touch so brief it could have been an accident, yet everything in her body went still. He didn't pull away immediately, just enough to leave the air charged. Sorry, he murmured. Don't be, she whispered. They returned to work, though neither of them saw much on the page. That afternoon they drove out to a quiet clearing near the French Broad River, where the sound of water drowned the world. Colleen brought the box with her, tucked beneath her arm. She didn't know why, but she wanted to open it somewhere peaceful, somewhere that felt like Evan could still see her. They sat on a worn picnic bench, sunlight dappling through the trees. The air smelled of pine and earth. Colleen held the envelope again. Her voice trembled. Do you ever think people leave us messages from the beyond, not in words, but in timing? Grant looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe it's the only way they know we're finally ready to hear them. She smiled faintly. Then maybe I'm ready. She unfolded the letter she'd been avoiding for months. Evan's handwriting filled the page. Familiar curves, deliberate strokes. Colleen, my love, if you're reading this, I failed to make it back to you. But don't let that be the end of our story. The world will try to make you smaller, quieter, safer, but you were never meant for smallness. You were meant for courage. Her lips quivered. Grant's hand rested lightly on hers, steadying her without words. Raise our children to believe that loss isn't an end, but a beginning in disguise. And when you feel alone, remember that the strongest hearts aren't those that never break. They're the ones that break and still choose to love again. A tear slipped down her cheek. Grant didn't speak. He just watched, silent as the river, letting her have this moment. She finished reading, then folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. He knew. He knew exactly what I'd need to hear. Grant's voice was low. He must have loved you more than most men know how to love. Colleen looked at him, eyes glistening. He did, but I think he'd want me to live again, not just remember. Grant held her gaze, steady, full of respect and something unspoken. Then start with today. The sun dipped lower, turning the water gold. For the first time in months, Colleen laughed freely, not the brittle laughter of pretending, but something real. They sat there until the sky turned violet, two souls scarred in different ways, beginning to understand that maybe healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding new reasons to stay. As they packed up to leave, Colleen slipped the letter back into the box and whispered, "Thank you, Evan." Grant caught her whisper and said softly, "He'd be proud of you, Colleen." She smiled through tears. "Maybe, but he'd be even prouder if I made sure his truth came to light." Grant nodded. "Then we'll do it together." Back in town, as the evening lights flickered on, Colleen watched her twins run ahead on the sidewalk, their laughter echoing down Main Street. She felt the cool air brush against her face, smelled the faint sweetness of blooming magnolias, and for the first time since Evan's death, she didn't feel broken. She felt becoming. When grief and hope share the same heart, it doesn't break, it expands. And in that widening, love finds its way back in.
Peace is fragile. It never shatters loudly. It cracks in whispers, in moments that seem harmless until they're gone. For Colleen Ward, the breaking began on a Thursday morning, the kind that should have been ordinary. The twins had gone to school, the air smelled of wet pavement after dawn rain, and Grant Lowe sat across from her at the small kitchen table reviewing the final documents. They were close, so close to proving that Harold Ward had stolen from his son's inheritance. On the table between them lay the flash drive, the copies of Blue Horizon Holdings, and the letter from Evan. Grant's laptop hummed as he scrolled through encrypted files. "This last folder might be the one," he murmured. "It's labeled Ward Foundation Private. That's where he hid the charity laundering." Colleen sipped her coffee, hands trembling slightly. "If this proves what we think it does," he murmured. "It's more than proof," he said, glancing at her. "It's justice." She smiled faintly, though nerves fluttered in her stomach. "Justice. That sounds like a word rich people forget how to spell." Grant chuckled, then clicked open the final document. But instead of data, a single message flashed on the screen. "Access logged. Alert sent to administrator." The color drained from his face. "Oh no." Colleen leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means someone just got notified we opened this file." Within hours, things began to shift. A black car parked across the street that night, unmarked, silent. Grant noticed first, but said nothing until he was sure. Then, as he helped Colleen close up the diner, he said quietly, "Don't panic, but we're being watched." She froze mid-step. "By who?" "My guess? Harold Ward's private investigator. He must have caught wind that the files resurfaced." The world seemed to tilt. The safety she'd built, fragile, tentative, wavered. "I thought you said we were careful," she whispered. "We were," Grant said grimly, "but power always listens when it's being threatened." 2 nights later, while Colleen was tucking the twins into bed, a knock came at the door. She assumed it was Grant. It wasn't. 2 men stood there in dark suits. One flashed a badge, though she never caught the name. "Mrs. Ward, we're investigating claims of stolen property from the Ward estate. We'll need you to come with us for questioning." Colleen's pulse raced. "I don't understand." "It's routine," he said curtly. "Bring the documents your associate provided you." Grant appeared in the hall just then, having arrived moments too late. "You can't do that without a warrant," he said, stepping between them. The taller man smiled coldly. "Then we'll come back with one." As they left, Colleen stood frozen, her heart hammering. "Grant," she whispered, "what's happening?" "They're trying to scare you," he said, voice tight. "They can't touch you legally, not yet." "But they will, won't they?" Grant met her eyes and didn't answer. That night, fear returned like a thief. Colleen paced the living room while rain battered the windows. The twins were asleep again, unaware of the storm gathering around their mother. Grant sat on the couch, head in his hands. She stopped pacing. "You should go," she said quietly. He looked up, startled. "What?" "They'll come after you next. You've done enough for me already." "I'm not leaving you, Colleen." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. I can't lose anyone else." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Grant stood, taking a step closer. "You're not losing me." She turned away. "You don't know that. I know what it looks like when someone's given up. That's not you anymore." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then why does it feel like it?" He reached out, gently touching her shoulder, but she flinched. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, not right now." His hand fell away. "All right," he said softly. "I'll give you space. But I'm not walking away." When the door finally shut behind him, Colleen sank to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Even the strongest hearts crack under the weight of old wounds, but sometimes breaking again is the only way to make room for truth. When she awoke, Grant was gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. Panic clawed at her chest. Then on the kitchen table, she found a single note in his handwriting. "They traced the flash drive. I have to fix this before they reach you. Trust me. G." Colleen's hand trembled as she read the words. "Grant, no," she whispered. She looked toward the twins' room, their drawings still taped to the wall, and made her decision. She wasn't going to wait for rescue, not anymore. She gathered every document, every file, and tucked them into a backpack.
Then she pulled Evan's letter from the box and folded it carefully inside. His words felt alive again. You were meant for courage. She locked the door behind her and walked into the rain, each step steady, each breath fierce. She didn't know if Grant was safe. She didn't know if the Wards were watching, but one thing she did know. She wasn't that helpless woman standing in the rain months ago. She will walk toward the fight now, and this time, she's the storm. What would you do if the truth that could free you was the same truth that could destroy everything you loved? Share your thoughts below. If you were Colleen, outmatched but awakening, would you keep fighting or would you run to protect what's left? Tell us what your heart says. Leave your answer in the comments, because sometimes stories like this are mirrors waiting for your reflection.
The rain had stopped by morning, but the streets of Hendersonville still glistened as though the sky had left pieces of its sorrow behind. Colleen Ward walked quickly, her hood pulled up, the backpack clutched tight against her chest. The world felt different now, sharper, louder, full of meaning she couldn't yet name. The twins were safe with Ruthie at the community center, unaware that their mother was walking into the kind of decision that would define the rest of their lives. She reached the old bank downtown just as the clock struck 9. The building was quiet, its marble floors echoing beneath her shoes. A man behind the glass counter looked up, startled by her urgency. "Can I help you, ma'am?" Colleen nodded, sliding the folded letter across the counter. "Thomas Keene. My husband said you'd know what to do." The man froze at the mention of the name, his expression changing from politeness to alarm. "Come with me," he said softly. He led her to a small office in the back, closing the door behind them. The moment he saw Evan's handwriting, his shoulders sagged. "I always wondered when this day would come," he murmured. "Evan told me if anything happened to him, you'd come here one day." He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope and a key card. "He left these under my care. He said they belonged to you and the children." Colleen stared at them. "What is this?" "The access key to Blue Horizon Holdings, and the instructions to activate it. He moved everything, every cent he could hide from his father, into that account. It's yours now." Her knees nearly gave way. "Mine?" Thomas nodded. "And there's something else. A private message file stored in the company's drive. He said you'd need to see it before you made any decisions." Colleen's throat tightened. She reached for the key card, her hand trembling. "How do I open it?" "Evan trusted you," Thomas said quietly, "but be careful. If Harold Ward finds out this account still exists, he'll do everything in his power to destroy it." She met his gaze. "Then we'll make sure he doesn't." By the time she left the bank, the sun had broken through the clouds. The light felt strange, almost too bright for what she carried inside. She walked to the small diner where she and Grant had spent so many nights over coffee and secrets. The bell above the door jingled. The tables were empty. He wasn't there. She sat at their usual booth and waited, tapping her fingers on the counter, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint murmur of the radio. Every sound felt heavier than it should. Hours passed before she saw him again. Grant entered quietly, his shirt wrinkled, eyes tired. There was a bruise along his jaw. "Grant," she breathed, standing up. He managed a faint smile. "You found him. Keene." She nodded. "He gave me the access key. Evan left everything to me." Grant exhaled, relief and exhaustion mixing in one long breath. "That's incredible." "It's dangerous," she said. "They know we're getting close." "I know." She reached out, touching the bruise on his face. "What happened?" "Harold's men caught up with me in Charlotte. They wanted the drive. I didn't give it to them." Her heart clenched. "You could have been killed." "Maybe, but I promised I'd see this through." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. Two people who'd already lost too much, clinging to the fragile space between fear and faith. Colleen stepped back, her voice steady. "There's one thing left to do. We go public. Everything Evan hid,
every document, every transfer. We send it to the press." Grant hesitated. "That would destroy Harold, but it could expose you too. He'll retaliate." She met his eyes. "I've lived under his shadow long enough. I'm not hiding anymore." They drove out of town that evening, up the winding road that overlooked the valley. Hendersonville shimmered below them, quiet, peaceful, unaware that a reckoning was about to begin. Grant parked the car, and they sat for a moment in silence. The air smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth. Colleen opened the laptop and inserted the keycard. The screen flickered to life, and Evan's private message appeared. Her hands shook as she read the first line aloud. "If you're reading this, it means you've already been brave enough to look. Don't let them make you doubt that courage now. The truth will hurt, but it will set you and your children free." Tears welled in her eyes. He knew this moment would come. Grant leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. "Play the video file." She clicked it open. Evan's face appeared, recorded months before his death. He looked tired but resolute. "Colleen, if you're watching this, then I couldn't stop what was coming. My father found out about the company, about the money. He's capable of things you don't want to believe. Protect the twins. And when you have the strength, take back what's ours. Don't let him bury you like he buried me." The screen froze on his face. Colleen covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Grant reached over, placing his hand gently over hers. "We'll finish it, Colleen, together." She nodded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "He didn't just leave me money. He left me a mission." They sat there until the sky turned from blue to purple. The weight of what they'd uncovered hung between them, grief, truth, and something almost holy. At last, Colleen turned to him. "Once I send these files, there's no going back. Are you ready for that?" Grant smiled faintly. "You already know the answer." She took a deep breath, opened her laptop again, and began to upload every document, every recording, every trace of Harold Ward's deceit to a journalist's private inbox. The progress bar crept slowly across the screen. When it reached 100%, she whispered, "It's done." Grant leaned back, looking at her with quiet awe. "You just ended a dynasty." She wiped her tears and smiled faintly. "No, I just started one." By the time they drove back into town, Hendersonville's lights flickered on in the distance, and the world felt new. Colleen looked out the window, the night air cool against her face. She wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since Evan's death, she felt something solid beneath her grief, something unbreakable. Her choice had been made.
Dawn rose gently over Hendersonville, brushing the town in gold. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp with the scent of pine and promise. Colleen Ward stood by the window of her small rented home, a mug of coffee warming her hands. The twins were still asleep, curled beneath the quilts Ruthie had sewn for them. For the first time in a long while, the house was quiet, not the kind of silence born of loss, but the kind that comes after survival. The past week had unfolded like something out of a dream. The files she and Grant released spread like wildfire. By the second morning, the Ward name was on every news network in the country. Blue Horizon Holdings, charitable fraud, offshore accounts, the words ran across every headline. Harold Ward was arrested 2 days later, escorted out of his Charlotte estate in handcuffs. The man who had once called her unworthy had been undone by the truth his own son had hidden for love of her. Colleen didn't watch the footage. She didn't need to. Some victories aren't meant to be celebrated out loud. She thought instead of Evan, of the life they'd built, the laughter, the quiet mornings with coffee and the twins climbing into their bed. He had been the best part of her world, and though grief would always hum beneath her ribs, it no longer ruled her. Grant arrived mid-morning. He stepped inside quietly, holding a folded newspaper. "It's official," he said, setting it on the counter. "The court recognized your ownership of the Blue Horizon account. Every cent is yours and the twins." Colleen smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "Evan did it. Even from the grave, he made sure we'd be okay." "He believed you would be," Grant said softly. "He just wanted you to believe it too." They stood there for a moment in easy silence. Outside, the town was waking up. Cars passing, dogs barking, children laughing somewhere down the street. Life was moving forward, and for once, Colleen didn't feel like she was standing on the outside of it. Grant reached into his pocket and placed a small flash drive on the counter. "This was in the last envelope Thomas Keene gave me. Evan recorded one more message." Her heart skipped. "Another one?" He nodded. "He wanted you to have it only when everything was finished." Colleen hesitated, then took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered, and Evan's face appeared once again, smiling this time, healthier, recorded long before the chaos began. "If you're watching this, it means you found the truth, and that means you've already done what I couldn't. You faced them. I need you to remember something, Colleen. You were never meant to survive for me. You were meant to live for yourself. Build something new. Laugh again. Let them see that they couldn't take your light." Colleen pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Grant looked away, giving her a quiet moment of privacy. When the video ended, she whispered, "Thank you." Not to the screen, but to the memory of him, to the courage he'd left behind like a map. Weeks passed. With her inheritance restored, Colleen rebuilt her life, not with extravagance, but with purpose. She reopened the old diner where she used to work, renaming it the Juniper Table, after the tree that had once shaded the bench where she'd first met Evan. Every morning she stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for locals who'd known her story, though few dared to mention it. The twins helped after school, wiping tables, counting tips and giggles. Grant came by often, sometimes for pie, sometimes just to sit in the quiet. The space between them no longer felt like waiting. It felt like healing. One evening, as the sun melted behind the Blue Ridge peaks, Grant lingered by the door. "You ever think about leaving Hendersonville?" She smiled. "I used to. Not anymore. Everything I ran from is gone. Everything I needed was right here." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You know, I think Evan would have liked that." Colleen met his gaze, calm and certain. "I know he would have." They stood there for a moment, not in grief, not in guilt, but in gratitude. Two souls who had fought through ruin and found something rare on the other side, peace. Later that night, after closing, Colleen stepped outside. The sky was a spill of stars, the kind that only appear after long storms. The cool air brushed against her skin, and she looked toward the distant hills where the Ward estate used to stand. Empty now, its windows dark. She didn't feel hate anymore, just release. "I forgive you," she whispered into the wind, not for Harold's sake, but for her own. She turned, hearing laughter through the diner window. Her children, Grant joking with them over slices of pie. That sound, laughter, it was everything she had fought for. Colleen walked back inside, locking the door behind her. The sign outside glowed in soft white letters. The Juniper Table, where stories begin again. And that night, as the lights dimmed, she finally understood. Redemption doesn't arrive in thunder or vengeance. It comes quietly, when the heart chooses to keep loving despite everything that tried to break it. If you've ever been torn between anger and forgiveness, between holding on or letting go, What choice would you make if life handed you both pain and power? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes the way we answer stories like Colleen's is the way we begin to heal our own.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you loved this story, you will definitely love the next one. It's more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So go ahead and watch it now. Click on the image on your screen right away to watch the next one. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It helps and encourages us to share the best human interest stories you'd love.